Hello, thanks for joining my Sunday live walk in Odessa's Old Town. Today we are starting at Catherine Square. I finished my yesterday's walk here. I talked about the square a little bit and about the monument to Odessa's founders. Today I'm going to share a few more stories about Catherine Square and the monument to Odessa's founders. Then we'll walk from the square into a little bit of a residential area of the old town. We'll see a few beautiful mansions with very interesting stories, one palace. As always, check out an Odessa's courtyard and do some window shopping. Let's get going. Here is Catherine Square, the monument to Odessa's founders. And Catherine Street, which is a very happening place when the weather is nice. It's packed with bars and cafes, and usually there are lots of people standing outside with their drinks. But of course that doesn't happen in the winter season. When the city was founded in 1794, here on the square, on the spot, they laid the foundation of the Russian Orthodox Church. Over there, where you see the tall building, the statue, and the Hanukkah menorah, let me pull up the view. Here it is. Over there is the Black Sea and the Bay of Odessa. That tall building is standing on the commercial port area. The Bolshevik Revolution gave start to a very eventful history of the spot. Of course, the Bolsheviks couldn't live with the monument to the empress, so they moved the statues away, and instead of them, they put on top of the column the bust of Karl Marx. Then the bust was substituted with a proper statue of Marx. A decade later, Marx was put away, and then after World War II, in 1965, they put here the monument to the battleship Potemkin sailors. The Soviet propaganda positioned those sailors as the first protesters against the Tsar regime. A huge monument of the battleship Potemkin sailors stood exactly here on this spot. It consisted of several sailors who looked towards Karl Marx Street. That was Karl Marx Street during the Soviet time. Then in 1990s, after the USSR broke down, the city administration decided to give back the streets and squares their original names. So we got rid of the Soviet names. And then in the early 2000s, the statue to Odessa's founders was put back here. And so far is the end of the story. To avoid any questions regards the name of the square and the street, the city's administration put this plaque, which says that the street and the square are named after the Orthodox Saint Catherine, who was supposed to give the name of the church which the city started building here upon its foundation. All these were private mansions which had been finished by 1901. Then after the Bolshevik Revolution, they were nationalized and turned into apartments and communal flats. After the USSR broke down, people were allowed to become owners of the places where they were registered and where they were living. So today these are apartments which are privately owned. Some are still communal flats. Some buildings like this one belong to a bank. So the whole building is the bank. the MTB Bank. During our yesterday's live, you can watch it on our YouTube channel here. We checked what's there in the back of this beautiful green building. We were in its courtyard. So now let's go check out the backyard of this house. First of all, there's a hotel here, Ekaterina Hotel. I've mentioned this lots of times by now, but if that's the first time you are watching us, so let me give a quick explanation. According to the city plan, houses had to be built as close to the road as possible. Wall to wall, there was an arch for the carriage, and the only space people had was in the back of the house. This space was used to park carriages. Sometimes had apartments for servants or to rent out. Today part of this building is the hotel Ekaterina. Up there in the front is the new apartment building. We'll see it a bit later and I'll tell you a few stories about it. And this is a side wall of that pink building which faces the square. These balconies and windows were made during the Soviet times when large apartments were converted into the communal flats. And the garages appeared most probably in 1980s or in 1990s. And this is the back wall of this gray mansion, which originally belonged to an aristocratic family and today belongs to a bank. Now let me go back onto the square. Some of the apartments here are pretty nice, rather expensive, large, about 200 square meters, and quite posh in terms of the interior design. And the price for them varies from something between $200,000 to $300,000, depending on the interior design. That sounds probably not much by European or American standards, but it's a lot for this country. Some apartments are smaller, they're still communal flats. Usually you can tell about the apartment by the windows. Let me flip the camera and give you an example. The anchor has been the symbol of the city, its coat of arms, since the Soviet times. And then if you look up closely at these three dark brown windows of the balcony, you can probably see that they look a little bit old, which means that they belong either to a communal flat or to an apartment which doesn't have a very expensive interior design, most probably belongs to very senior people, and it won't be very expensive to buy it. Here is a different view on the square. Catherine's profile. She's standing there on the column pointing at the harbor. Astor House is the name of the hostel which occupies the second and the third floor of this building. Now it's closed because of the situation in the tourism industry. And there are a few stores in this building. Sparkling Wine Gallery, it's a cafe. We are not in a lockdown, it's just that it's too early. It's a little bit past 11, so it's a little bit too early for them to be open. this store sells rare books and stamps. And we're getting ready for Christmas and New Year. Here's a flower shop. They also organize corporate and private events. Here's Esther House and a Patrizia Pepper designer store on the first floor. Odessa has long been known for its love for classical music and opera. The city was 16 years old when the city's administration built the first city theater. And soon afterwards, Italian opera became so popular that even carriage drivers knew how to sing most famous parts of opera in Italian. I've talked a lot about it, and we did a live walk of the National Opera and Ballet Theater a couple of weeks ago. You can look it up on our YouTube channel here. So hype for classical music was huge. In the early 1900s, the second largest ethnic group here were the Jews. And at that period, classical music became a huge social lift for a Jewish person. There was a musical college which belonged to the Emperor's Musical Society here in Odessa, and everybody, all families, including the Jewish families, could send their children there. Particularly popular were the violin classes, given by a teacher named Stolarsky. In 1920s, his students started winning international musical contests, and in 1930s, the Soviet government let him open the first in the USSR boarding school for musically gifted children. Let me flip the camera and show you the building of that school. So here's the building of the first in the USSR boarding school for musically gifted children. The building was heavily damaged in World War II bombings, was restored in 1950s after the war. It still is a school for musically gifted children. It includes elementary, middle and high school, general education classes, but then lots of musical classes, and education in general is geared towards music. And it's still a big trend in the city among the local families to send their children who have a talent towards music to study in this school. Let me share with you a story which illustrates the impact of the school on the global music heritage. On one Sunday in 1955, 3 prominent violin players performed in Carnegie Mellon Hall in New York. One came from the USSR and the other 2 were the US citizens. And almost nobody in the Carnegie Mellon Hall who attended the contest knew that all 3 of them were born and raised in Odessa and took their first violin classes in the school. Their names were David Oystra, Nathan Milstein, and Michael Ellman. I'm now walking on the second oldest stone bridge in the city. It was built in 1830s. Here is the plaque. Sabaneyev Bridge, built in 1831, restored in 1866. These white things are put there to stop the cars from parking on the bridge. Underneath the bridge is the natural ravine, which goes under the bridge and then continues. Let me cross the road. Continues on the other side and goes into the harbor. In the old days, it was used as a road to bring cargo into the port. And for the first time in our live walks, you can see here something new. Here is a modern apartment building built in 2004. A preschool next to it, located in the old building. And here is another new apartment building, which was finished 2 years ago. There's still an unofficial rule in the city. If a construction company builds a new apartment building in the old town, it tries to fit in the building into the look and feel of the old city. And here is another view on this musical boarding school. And Catherine Square in the back. And now back to old buildings. This was a private mansion built by a local banker in the 1800s. Today it belongs to a local construction company who restored it, and now it's sitting empty because they don't know what to do with it. They've been trying to sell it for a couple of years, but it looks like the attempts were unsuccessful. And this facade belongs to one of the most famous palaces in the city, the Tolstoy Palace. The facade looks at the old city, at Catherine Square. So a few words about the palace. This is known as the Tolstoy Palace. Belonged to a distant relatives of the famous writer Lev Tolstoy, who lived in Odessa. So not